My next question to Mr. Jiddal is, how prepared are CBDCs in terms of risk management, especially in the cybersecurity space?
Central banks are doing their homework when it comes to CBDCs. I think in one of the earlier answers, we touched upon what the People's Bank of China was doing. They for years they studied how they would implement a digital yuan, what would be the risks around it, what would be the security risks around it, before then launching a pilot in April 2020, and then expanding that pilot this year. I mentioned earlier that the Swedish central bank is also doing the same. What central banks usually do, they follow a process of, first of all, studying the risks around the introduction, how they would mitigate those risks, how a digital currency would operate in the real economy, what sort of impact that could have in the real economy, and then they move from there into running pilots. And then once they have run a successful pilot, they can then slowly expand it and launch it into the wider economy. But if we also have to look at from this point of view that there is no choice. I mean, it is not like central banks see it as a choice that, okay, maybe we can not do CBDCs. I think the understanding is that they are looking at this as something that has to be done. And it has its huge benefits. From a central banker's point of view, the biggest headache that they have with cash is counterfeiting. There is a huge amount of counterfeit cash which is in the economy today. And even as you and me, as regular punters on the road, when we get a note, we are not completely sure. We cannot be completely sure, whatever may be the ways in which we are taught of how to spot fake cash. We can never be completely sure if what we have is real or fake. And that is one of the biggest headaches that a central banker has with cash. And a CBDC solves that problem. In a single swipe, what it does is it replaces a physical cash which is prone to counterfeiting with a digital currency which is completely under the control of the central bank. And the second problem that a central banker has with cash is the cost of printing the cash, right? So there, I mean, by some estimates, the cost of printing a 2,000 rupee note is, I think, 3 to 4 rupees per note. And then getting that cash physically outside of the printing press to the central bank, to the banks, into the wider economy and into the hands of the people. There is a cost to this entire process. And digital currencies, CBDCs, again, bring that cost next to zero. So these are the two big headaches with cash that certain bankers can solve. And therefore, I think central bankers have accepted CBDCs with alacrity. They are looking at really implementing them, and they're doing their homework. They're coordinating with each other. They're learning from each other as well. And they are the Euro example, like I talked about earlier, where they have moved very quickly. They set up a task force in the beginning of 2020. They are now in the process of setting up trials. They're now in the process of setting up what will be pilots for the digital euro. So they are moving quickly. They are solving problems as they're moving quickly. And the positive thing that I think, and I think it should expand, is that they are no longer looking at the private sector with a bit of suspicion. Traditionally, allowing the private sector into something as hallowed as a central bank currency has sort of been taboo. It has been, this is sort of our domain. We don't want the private sector to come in. But I think what central bankers and governments are realizing, that the private sector has something to contribute. They have the talent, they have the expertise. Dr. Charagra was mentioning about clouds. Governments were looking with skepticism at clouds because they were skeptical about private companies holding data like this. But they have come to realize that it is more efficient and it's more secure if they if we create the right regulatory requirement and rules, and then we allow the private sector to follow those rules, and then we can use their services better. So I think they're really, really going in the right direction. The level of preparedness is high. And with the right interplay between the private sector and the government, I think the problems that will come on this road in terms of security and so on can be resolved together.
My next question to Dr. Chakraborty is, can there be any coexistence between central banks and private tech companies in order to resolve technology challenges?
The coexistence of central bank with the private person, private company coming together. And I think if you see that, that's happening in a big way in terms of CBDC, because what is happening is the CBDC's ownership will lie to the central bank, but the development of the CBDC can be done by any big private tech company, which will be working with the central bank. And may the distribution channel can be the commercial bank. I think that's an ideal model of design for CBDC will be, because central banks are not expert in technology. That is not their role. They are not supposed to be expert in technology. For example, if let's say central bank of any country, they can design the policy, they can design the model, and then they can recruit some technology company to come and design, implement that product, and then they can use the commercial bank for the distribution channel. So then, this pyramid will work very nicely, where it is a combination of government and private coming together. I think that's the best way to work.
My next question goes to Mr. Jindal. Why do central banks want to get into digital currency in the first place?
Central banks are not looking at CBDCs as something on the lines of Bitcoin or traditional cryptocurrencies. What they are looking at is CBDC as a similar to cash, a digital version of cash, but a fiat currency. But they see huge benefits in the adoption of CBDCs. Number one, with cash, counterfeiting is common, and that becomes a thing of the past if you introduce CBDCs. Because the issuance of CBDC is now firmly within the control of the central bank, and with the right technologies, it is virtually impossible. Why is Bitcoin so well trusted? Because it is virtually impossible to sort of duplicate transactions there, and there is a well-oiled process to check the validity of a Bitcoin or a transaction. Secondly, the benefit that the central bank sees is that the cost of is going to go low. Cost of currency issuance. So it costs what, 3 to 4 rupees to print a 2,000 rupee note, right? And then not just that, the cost doesn't end there. That note has to be physically transported into the central bank coffers, and then that has to be physically transported to the State Bank of India district branch, and then has to be physically transported into the last mile. There is a huge amount of cost that is associated with cash, physical cash, and then that cash has a shelf life. It'll wear and tear. It'll lose its value, and then a new cycle, and then the cycle starts again. So these costs will be eliminated. Well, if you have a digital currency is not something that is going to cost a huge amount of money to transport it to the last person who needs to use it, to the retail person, right? So for a central banker, that is hugely attractive. There is a reduced cost and reduced headache of cash issuance. The third huge benefit that they see today, they are very much dependent on reports and data that comes with a 6-month or a 1-year lag, which allow them to make policy decisions. And in many economies, there is a parallel economy that runs, which is outside of the purview and the visibility of the central bank. And what happens there is that the policy that they make does not impact that economy, or probably sometimes they make a policy in good faith, but because the informal economy is so large, the benefits of that policy do not trickle down into the real economy. So, and a cash is something that enables that parallel economy, because cash is outside of the control of the central bank once it leaves its building. However, with a digital CBDC, what happens is that transactions can be monitored, and they can be monitored in real time. And therefore, this rich treasure trove of data that is feeding into the central bank servers can be used to create policy which is much more responsive and is able to reach to the to the real economy very, very quickly. And finally, I think the biggest for us as users, I think the biggest benefit is cash is dirty. Cash is physically dirty. All of that goes away. I mean, so you've got digital currency. There is no such physical handling of cash of any sort. And that sort of is a huge benefit as well. So these are some of the benefits which make CBDC a fait accompli in a way. It makes something which is essential. It makes something that is not going to go away. That something needs to be adopted. And central banks are just looking at the right frameworks within which they can adopt CBDCs.
Well, on that note, I would like to ask Dr. Chakraborty, what are the macroeconomic challenges that propel central banks to go for CBDCs?
Let's take an example that any economy where say any private cryptocurrency comes and says that they say that all shops, all restaurants, and all transactions can be done through Bitcoins. For example, central bank has not allowed that, but let's say individually the bank as hotel association has decided that we'll accept Bitcoin. So you go to an hotel or a restaurant and start paying on through Bitcoins, and they're accepting it. Central bank has no clue about this transaction. Government of that country doesn't have any clue about this transaction. So there's a official, mutually decided parallel economy running. And it's not that parallel economy which we used to discuss earlier. This is mutually decided. So for example, let's say hotel association has decided, let's say shopkeepers association has decided that they will accept Bitcoins. Or let's say trade unions have decided they are ready to take into a salary through Bitcoins, and so on and so forth. So if that thing starts happening, that means what is happening? The Bitcoin becomes a mode of payment, or any private cryptocurrency becomes a mode of payment. And if that happens, then slowly and steadily, which I was referring in my first response, the sovereignty of the currency goes away. So for example, if this thing happens in India, the Indian rupee loses sovereignty part and everything is done through a private cryptocurrency, which is not good for any economy, because you will not be able to frame any policies, because the policies will be out of your control. The entire payment system will be out of your control. So there'll be nothing. And as you rightly said, the central banks will not have any clue about the data. So they cannot do any supervisions. Nothing will happen. So that's one of the biggest challenge which central banks are facing, that if they don't go for CBDC, then their physical cash can be replaced by the private cryptocurrencies. And this replace means what? The people may not be taking it your currency, but they will make the payments through Bitcoins, because everything can be done what Arshdeep just talked about through private cryptocurrencies. So that's the biggest challenge a central banks or a government of any country will face. And that's the reason why most of the central banks are moving towards it. So along with this, all the logistic operational cost, which Arshdeep said, this is another challenge which central banks have, that their currencies may lose their significance. It will not be any more significant currency in their own country, and which is the biggest threat for any country to happen. So we have seen that how difficult it is in one of the African countries, Zimbabwe, when they took the option of dollarization, they came out with the dollar. And after that, again, they thought they should have their own local currency, but that local currency is not working because people are used to that dollar payment. And so we have seen that in any economy, people get used to the one mode of payment, they'll go for it. So it's like an habit. So it will be very difficult for to make people out and go for another payment channel or another payment asset. So that's why central banks are much more gearing or rushing for this, because they don't want to go for this risk of replacement of their own currency by a private cryptocurrency. So that's the, I think, one of the main factor why central banks are moving towards. But yes, all other points which Arshdeep said makes a CBDC a very good payment option for central bank, that it will reduce the cost, it will make the payment more efficient. During the COVID time, many people didn't want to touch currency because they thought the virus can spread through cash, and so that was the issues. So all this will go if you have a CBDC. But at the same time, it will also protect your sovereign currency.
Well, my last question to Dr. Chakraborty is, when do you think CBDCs would be in the mainstream?
Vinita, my first response only, you will see it very soon. In maybe in next 3 to 5 years, it will be very much part of in almost all countries. I can visualize that, because as I said, almost 60 central banks they're already, doing their research or their pilot study, or they're already gone live. So it's not far off. It's not far off. And also I say that because there's no other option, you have to go for CBDCs. As we have discussed, there are various issues and other things, the challenges. So we know that there's no other option, but the central bank has to go for CBDCs, and it's a good option to go for it because there will be a lot of benefits for the economy. And so that's my answer is you'll see that in next few years, it's not far off. In 5 years, definitely it will be reality in most of the countries, you'll see that. But how much it will replace the cash, that's the question we need to see. Because we'll start with some percentage of cash replacement, and then slowly it will build it upon. Especially like countries like India and all, which is the very big countries, and replacing cash is not easy. Small countries like Mauritius or a small island, they can do that quickly because the size are small, the numbers are small. So that needs to be seen. But to answer your question, how quickly we'll see this a reality? My money is on next 3 years, you'll see it as a reality.
Well, this is my last question to Mr. Jindal. Where do you see the adoption of CBDCs across the world in the next 5 years?
In the next 5 years, we will see a large number of people in the world living in economies where CBDCs are now live and they are working. I think you will see digital euro. I think a euro area will have a CBDC of its own. That would be around 500 million people, and what is, I think, the largest economy bloc in the world. The People's Republic of China will definitely have a functioning CBDC, which I think will have been widely adopted. I definitely hope that India will move towards a CBDC and foster an environment wherein adoption of the CBDC becomes very attractive for users. I think India has already done that well with digital payments. Therefore, the share of digital payments in the economy is rising quickly. And I think if the government and the regulator would take this a step further with CBDC and make the adoption of CBDC very, very easy, then we would see, because we have seen is that I don't think the Indian public is shy of technology. I think the Indian public is very accepting of technology as long as it is easy to adopt, it is straightforward, and it is secure. And with a CBDC has the ultimate sort of security. It has the security of the central bank behind it. So with the right ecosystem of applications, I think that will be key. Applications which will utilize CBDC in the form of making retail payments, which will then be used by individuals. I think if that can be fostered by government intervention, you will see a wide adoption of CBDC in the Indian subcontinent as well. America is taking its own steps towards a CBDC. There are many Latin American countries that are taking its own steps. I think there is one Latin American country that actually has adopted Bitcoin as its official currency. So that shows you how sort of they are thinking as well. Dr. Churagra has mentioned that the case in Africa, where there are lots of African countries which are moving towards CBDC. So, I mean, definitely in the next 5 years, you will see at least half of the world's population, if not more, would be living in economies which will have a wide sort of adoption and rollout of CBDCs in their respective countries.
Well, that was an excellent and a highly informative conversation with two of my esteemed guests here. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and for enriching us with the clarity on the future of money, on the future of CBDC, and also for showing us the future where cryptocurrencies could coexist cohesively with CBDC. Well, this conversation has opened up a new horizon of knowledge. With this thought, I'm yours truly, Vinita Chatterjee, signing off.